Great. Okay, so hi everyone. This is my first live interview for Rebel Intel, and I hope to do more of this in the future. I'm talking today with Nick Taylor. Nick Taylor is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Brandwatch. Brandwatch is one of our most well-known, prominent social listening platforms in the market. I co-founded an online monitoring tool a long time ago in Spain. And I've always been close to the evolution of this type of softwares. And Brandwatch was not the first but of its kind, maybe, but they've become absolute leaders in this software category, according to Forrester. It's not just me saying that, that Brandwatch are leaders. And since the beginning, Brandwatch had to work in a very specific area of artificial intelligence that it's called NLP, or natural language processing. And given that the ChatGPTs of the world, the LLMs, language models, have revolutionized this field, I was interested in understanding how the use of AI has evolved in Brandwatch and how they are incorporating generative AI in their suite of products. So, hi, Nick. Thanks for being here. A real pleasure to have you here. So my first question to you would be, who is Nick Taylor, and how has your role in Brandwatch evolved in these years?
Hi, Fernando. It's a pleasure to be on this. I didn't realize I would be the first of your interviews, yeah. So I hope this sets up many more, and it's a good one. Yeah, pleasure. I'm Nick, and I've been at Brandwatch now for at least 8 years, to that point where you start losing count of how many years. So I've had a fantastic kind of journey, sort of in my own career at Brandwatch, but also kind of like watching Brandwatch evolve, you know, from the early days of, well, the relatively early days, I suppose, of social listening, into all the different names that we give for what we do, you know, digital consumer intelligence, social analytics, and also kind of social suites, you know, expanding into, you know, not just understanding consumers, but really engaging with consumers with different products that we've been building. And of course, in recent years, you know, a lot of that development has been around, you know, how do we harness the improvements and the developments that are going on in all kinds of different AI, and this year in particular, generative AI and large language models. So it's been a fascinating time to be working at a company that's, as you say, kind of, you know, at the forefront of what's going on in this industry.
Yeah, great. So tell us a bit more about Brandwatch, what it is, what your strengths are, and the evolution in the recent years.
Yeah, of course. So Brandwatch was very early on, kind of, you know, crawling the web, and then as the social networks really sort of took over, you know, Brandwatch has been collecting data from, you know, any of these kind of official sources. We now partner with a lot of the major social networks, such as X and Reddit as well, which is a very different type of source of data. And really, the evolution of Brandwatch, while I've been here, has been about, you know, not just the early days where the message was very much like, if you're not listening to what's going on social media, if you're not on social media, other people are talking about your brand. And so you're missing out on what consumers are saying and what they're thinking. And of course, you know, there's immediate risks there. For example, you know, this has been a decade and a half or 2 decades, right, of the social media storm, and the fact that a brand's reputation can be very, very kind of quickly ruined overnight because of the viral spread on social media. But really, I think where Brandwatch began to differentiate itself around about sort of 2015, 2016, was that we saw that what we built was fantastic for social monitoring, but also the platform in Brandwatch, I think the real strength is in the analysis that you can do on the different, huge amounts of text that we can pull in. And so we really focused on building tools that were able not just to sort of spot mentions of a brand, but break those mentions down into all kinds of subcategories and topics, understand the audiences that are within those categories and those topics. And so you can really think of Brandwatch kind of making that shift in that period. And that was around about where we merged with another sort of leading social listening company called Crimson Hexagon. And we called that product that we built with those two companies merging consumer research. And this was very consciously because we were trying to show that what you can really do with Brandwatch is not just listening, but actually researching the opinions, the behaviors, the attitudes of all these different consumers around the world, and really kind of supplement traditional market research methods and build a more real-time analysis of what are people thinking and feeling about the very fast-moving topics that happen in our world today. And Crimson Hexagon were really pioneers in AI, specifically machine learning. So being able to actually train your own models to break this data down, where conversation online is so messy and noisy and complicated, and the kinds of topics that you're trying to find, right, like intent to purchase or attitudes to a brand and sentiment around different elements of a brand, needed AI or machine learning to help us actually kind of pull out the meaning from all of that noise. And so since then, Brandwatch has actually become a Cision company. We were acquired by Cision a couple of years ago. And two things have happened there. One is that we merged again with a company called Falcon.io, which is a social media management platform. And so we're bringing together the intelligence that Brandwatch has always been able to bring, with the ability to act on that intelligence, to publish content, to respond to customers and prospects on social channels, and to benchmark your performance against your competitors. And then at the same time, we're also working very hard on bringing the traditional media capabilities of Cision that have always been very strong in monitoring news media and other media data, in order to bring together the worlds of social and traditional, because those lines are now completely blurred, right? And one of the ways that I've heard people talk about this is, you know, everybody in a company these days is actually responsible for brand reputation, right? So if you take, for example, influencer marketing as an example, those influencers are now attached to your brand, and what they say about the controversial topics of the day now starts to reflect on the brand. This is the same across every department, right? Everyone is working to protect the brand's reputation in a world that moves so quickly, especially in social media. And so how do you bring together all the intelligence across the news, across online sources, across social media, and actually build a communications and a marketing strategy that is in line with how consumers and how the market sees the brand? And how do you build a stronger brand in that very, very challenging environment? So it's an evolving industry. We are always looking at all kinds of new stuff. And of course, when you talk about AI, that now expands to cover all kinds of new challenges as well. So, you know, we've been very focused in the last decade on, you know, how do you make sense of all the social data that's out there? But there are different approaches, different models perhaps, that need to be applied to different types of data. When you're looking at longer form content and news data, then suddenly you need AI to do a slightly different job for you. When you're looking at, you know, creating content, you need AI. And you know, currently with generative AI, there's so many opportunities in, like, how do you use AI to speed up the process and create better content and better responses to customers online as well.
So when people, I guess that people will come to you and ask you about your point of view about this generative AI, is more of a hype, or it's something profoundly changing how business is done, or how companies are doing many of the things that are being done in the market departments, communications. This interview will appear in Rebel Intel, and Rebel Intel is a newsletter specifically dedicated to AI and the intersection with the marketing, communication, communication, and customer experience. Okay, so how do you see when if someone will ask you, is this hype? Is this disruptive? Is this just an evolution? Is it gonna replace jobs, what would you answer to this question about how Gen AI is impacting these three areas: marketing, communications, and customer experience?
I mean, it's such a fascinating question, and you know, we could spend days talking about this. But I think for me, there's a couple of kind of key points in response to that. At some point, all the software that we build to analyze data may become completely redundant. I'm not putting a date on that as a non-expert, but at some point, you know, is there any point having widgets and components and features to analyze data instead of just saying there's an AI, I've fed it all of the data, and I can just start to ask it, like, you know, to tell me what it thinks I should know about in that data. So yes, at some point, this world is going to be completely disrupted. I don't believe that is happening anytime soon. But I think that fundamentally, even at that stage, you know, but really very much so where we are now, the people that are working with AI intelligently and using it to answer really complicated problems, you know, like how do you make sense of billions and billions of data points across social media, many of which are completely irrelevant or are fake or are, you know, not collected and not cleaned. How do you actually use the AI to bring out and unlock human skills, human creativity, the human ability to tell stories that actually impact and inform decision making in a business? And that's not going anywhere for a long time. Really, like, our approach at Brandwatch is very much, you know, AI has for years had huge opportunities and is getting more and more powerful and intelligent on its own, but is always really going to need human curation and human co-piloting. And I think that answers for me the question of, like, is AI going to take our jobs? And the answer is almost certainly yes. But I believe it's going to take all the jobs that we don't want, or the parts of our jobs that are really time consuming or just too kind of large in terms of what we can manage as humans. But really, we're going to need to change, all of us. I mean, if you're working in intelligence, if you're working on the front lines of a social media channel, everyone else, it's about learning to use AI and learning to use it in the right way and learning to kind of manage it and control it. You know, and this might be, for example, like a skill that may become very important is that people need to know how to train their own models or how to understand underlying models in order to interpret conclusions, or that people are going to need to be able to know how to apply AI to certain parts of their role and then know when they need to take over, when they need to double check the results, or when they need to actually manually turn those results into something that is more meaningful on the outside. And also, I think, really, like, education in risks, right? We are all going to need to be much more familiar with the problems that can arise with AI so that we are able to take over. So just like airline pilots, right? Yes, your job is made so much simpler with an autopilot. That does not mean that you no longer need to understand how it is all working, and that you are not able to take over when needed in order to, you know, to control things. Yeah.
Okay, and so the question was if these generative AIs were disruptive for the areas of marketing, communication, etc. But it's clear that, at least for Brandwatch, given that you've been working in NLP, in this natural language processing, for so many years, how the advent of these GPTs or transformer models and the different foundational models that are now, but GPT-2 was available in 2019, summer, something like that.
Yes.
So lots of startups and computer and software companies started playing with these models. Okay, so how has Brandwatch adopted these models over this year? What's your technological approach to AI? Be as technical as you want here. Be a specific goal. I mean, normally our audience are not are not technical people, but I'd like you to give us a bit more insight about the tech nuts and bolts of this.
Yeah. So, you know, as these developments come along in AI, there's often this period, right, where after a couple of years, a couple of things happen. Like one is that they get a lot more data, so they become much more powerful. Another one is that they become much more efficient. So they actually move from sort of interesting toys that, you know, you can put a couple of things into, but you know, your budget suddenly expands, to actually this is basically very cheap now to run a huge amount of data through. And those two things, I think, are really inform like how we have worked with some of these emerging technologies. So GPT-2, actually, Brandwatch was working with that back in 2018, 2019. We built the first AI-powered search for social listening and launched that in 2019. So this is essentially able to, we built it on top, and we built our own model with this open source, and it allows us to you know, start typing in a term, and then you can see like it knows every single entity. That could be a brand or a person or a activity or an organization or anything at all, which has its own Wikipedia page. And so using the data that we have in Wikipedia, which is a huge, fantastic source of kind of clarification on what each of these topics is, once you select one of those, it will be able to search through you know, 500 million posts per day, and it will go back through a whole year on any source and pull back just relevant mentions to that. No need to write a long, complicated Boolean search to exclude terms or to add in terms. It will know, for example, that Apple is a tech company and not a fruit or a record label, and it will just pull us all the results there. So this is the kind of thing which we did a calculation on this recently, by using these transformer models to sort of take a really smart underlying technology and then apply it to a new problem, and a very specific problem that everyone in our industry has had for many years, right? How do you actually kind of search for the right information? We can, if we plugged that into, I think it was GPT-3, and just asked it to do that, it was going to cost somewhere in the region of $12 million a day or something like that. The AI search in Brandwatch currently costs us something like $200 a day to actually maintain the AI model part of it, because we've spent the intermediate sort of 3 or 4 years in making that model more efficient, making it work in a way that doesn't require it to make multiple calls and inflate the cost for us and for our customers, right? But also that it is basically instant. It will work much faster. So sometimes there's really sexy and exciting new developments in AI, and we are obviously kind of being asked to look at that, and our data scientists are like, yes, we've heard about this one, we're looking at what we might be able to achieve there. But there's also a lot of very unsexy work that is really, really important in the development of AI, certainly in our tool, but I think everywhere, which is about, once you actually can make these things much more efficient, much more scalable, then it actually unlocks a huge amount of opportunities. One other place where we've been using transformer architectures is, for example, in sentiment analysis, which is a table stakes kind of type of analysis that's been around for many, many years, right? In the past, the way that we've approached sentiment is doing one language at a time. So once we had enough customers in a certain region that were interested in another language, we would build a whole new model, and we would train it with millions of data points. And that was effective at working on each language, but you know, it was never going to be able to be sustained. And like at some point you get certain language and you're like, well, is that important enough? Like, you know, well, maybe we have enough support tickets for people who want, you know, sentiment in Hungarian, but that's going to take us a long time, and we need some native Hungarian speakers and all of this. With the new sentiment model that Brandwatch released a couple of years ago, I think this might have been 2022, we now have a completely multilingual sentiment model. And so this essentially has been built on an underlying understanding of all language. And then on top of that, we're able to build a sentiment model classification. And then each time we want to evaluate how well that is working on a certain language, we can make certain tweaks to it to make it understand a little bit better what it's doing. But it is able to essentially assess sentiment in every single language. And that is a process that we hope to copy in all kinds of other areas as well. We no longer need to build things one at a time. We can actually have this completely multilingual approach because of the nature of new generative AI models that don't really even know which language they're looking at. They just have an understanding that language seems to work in a certain way, and the patterns that it can identify will work in another way. Other really interesting benefits for that is that, you know, we can analyze things like sentiment where there's two languages going on at the same time, or dialects of a language, because some languages are very, very different in different regions and things like that. And so there's not quite so much bias in who trained the model, like which dialect of Spanish was actually used and which native speaker was training our Spanish sentiment. Well, it doesn't matter anymore because the AI that's underlying it is actually sort of language agnostic and can pull in insight very, very quickly.
Wow, it's really, it's been, I guess that it has been amazing to be on board at Brandwatch these years, because so many things happening, and this idea that you can add so much value to your customers in months, like decreasing costs, or being able to tackle with this a lot of different tasks with these new models. In fact, I had some questions for you about regulation, but I think I'm going to switch to keep on to stay on the topic, because it's really amazing. It's how, so as always with these new technologies, you could also feel the a threat, or how are you tackling competition? Okay, first of all, we saw this the past week when OpenAI announced so many new things, and some startups started to think, oh my God, my business model was created on this API, using the API to do this, and now OpenAI is doing it directly, right? So how you think about competition from, like, if these foundational models are available for everybody, well, paying for the API or through open source models, how do you tackle competition from startups, and also from maybe clients that could say, okay, well, I don't want to pay Brandwatch to do this, because now I can use my own Brandwatch, OpenAI service, or if I've already bought ChatGPT Enterprise or something like that. Yeah. It's also OpenAI or ChatGPT a threat to Brandwatch in some sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't think we're thinking too much of that as a threat, but rather what's really interesting about the recent developments in generative AI is really more like they're such a leveler. So you know, the days of you know, us having really smart data scientists that can sort of set us apart and building something that no one else has. I mean, our AI search, for example, I think was a really good example of that. Now it's very much more like, oh, we can plug into OpenAI and we can get it to summarize a whole bunch of data, or we can make it generate social posts for us. Well, yeah, so can everybody else, and it'll probably take everyone a couple of months to do it. You know, it's so different. So that's kind of interesting, because the competitive landscape becomes more about who did it first within a matter of days, rather than like who's building something really smart. And I think actually, like the future, like it is going to be about how can we better build these new AI tools in an ecosystem where our customers are keeping their data, and also keeping their data organized in a certain way. So for the first one, right, I think that like one of the really interesting things that may be coming in the future is this idea of uh, private models and private data training sets, because that actually is kind of where the gap is at the moment. You know, everyone that plays around with ChatGPT knows that it always just gives you the most kind of average answer to everything. It's a great aggregator. And that's very, very useful. And it looks like magic, right? We're starting to get used to it this year, but it does feel like magic. It's still very much kind of like super, super general. Whereas our companies might be, you know, that are doing consumer research, might be thinking about the answers that they want in a very, very specific way. You know, some of our customers are very concerned with brand reputation and legal challenges. Some of them are much more interested in brand awareness and buzz. And so what they want to understand about the conversations is slightly different. So being able in the future to kind of use their own data, of which they're collecting a lot, to train the models and have a more closed system that's private to them and is specific to them, may well be how we will be able to kind of provide more value on top of that. The other thing is that we're very aware that there's a lot of other models out there, and that there are other ways that our customers are actually taking our data out and then bringing it back in and having kind of enhanced it with AI classification. And so we're exploring, for example, like how we might make that easier. So sort of building a gateway between Brandwatch products to be able to plug in these bring your own models and bring your own things. And then finally, like, why would you want to do that? Well, it's because actually still like 15-year differentiators in Brandwatch, I think, apply, which is about how we structure all the data and how customizable the organization of the data is within Brandwatch, right? So there's a really kind of multiplicative effect of AI on Brandwatch when you look at, for example, the ChatGPT integration that we have, which allows you to summarize a group of mentions that you're looking at. Very straightforward, but very, very impressive and powerful. Well, that's useful, but you don't just want to do that on all of my data, right? You want to do it on very, very specific segments within the data. And because in Brandwatch, you can really be very, very flexible with that. And you can have a saved categorization that is running all the time. You can say, I'm actually looking at specific audiences that I've created and that I've segmented in lots of different ways, or specific categories within conversations that are organized and benchmarked against each other and visualized in all kinds of ways. And then all the different AI models that you might feed into that become even more valuable, because it's not just summarizing, you know, what did everybody say about my brand this week, but actually what did these 10 key audiences say and how was that different? How did they talk about this product and that product in these different ways? And so I think that is very much how we see the approach to kind of, you know, the more general availability of these kinds of models is bringing it into a sort of central intelligence hub and making Brandwatch and leaning into the flexibility, the customization of Brandwatch as a place to handle all of that. And this goes right back to my first point, right, which is we're not seeing AI as something that is just going to completely do away with the need to have analysts or social media managers or anybody else, but really providing tools that helps AI to unlock the collaboration, the creativity, the intelligence of a human, to be able to pull all of those things together.
Yeah, great. So this is my last question, and has to do with I'm gonna be with you in Barcelona at your event, talking about a general impact of AI in things like reputation management and branding. Okay, so from your from a wide point of view, what we like, also like, this is the conclusion of this talk. How would you define, how would you explain the impact of AI in these fields?
It's such a good question, and
again,
talking about this a lot, and I find myself thinking about this a lot now as well. I think, you know, what one place that I would start to answer that question is, what is it? How are brands going to approach the fact that consumers and customers out there are going to be thinking so much more now am I reading something that was written by an AI or created by an AI? And how do they react to that? And this isn't a new phenomenon, right? I'm sure that this happens in other countries such as Spain, but like in the UK, for example, there's been brands that have really staked their reputation on certain sort of customer experience differentiators. It's specifically, brands like telecom brands that say, when you call us, you will speak to a human every time. And this is a differentiator, right? And this is something that's evolved out of the efficiencies gained through having a chatbot or whatever it is, and people not always kind of wanting that. And so I wonder if brands will start to think about that in a similar way with AI, right? Like when you read our content, it is always written by a human. Is there going to be this sort of artisan or more authentic approach? At the same time, consumers often, I mean, if we go back to the telecom example, sometimes I don't actually want to speak to a human. I'm fine. I just want to go to the website and click on what I'm looking for. I haven't got the time to speak to someone. And maybe there's something similar with AI, right? Like I actually am fine for all the legal documentation that I need to sign to just be kind of created by AIs, because I'm not really, I don't want to dive into that. So I think for me that's critical, right? Is how are brands going to try and set themselves apart? Again, where everything is very aggregated, everything is becoming the same, well, at the moment at least, when you look at AI. And I think the other one is just to do with trust, right? And I think that there's a huge challenge ahead with looking at insights about that we can draw from social data and other forms of data, which is going to be very easy to trust things. For example, I'll give you one, which is we were testing out something that would be a feature that would say, summarize this insight that you found in all of this data and give us a couple of the example posts that you used to come to that conclusion, right? So if you gave that to an intern, all right, you go, oh, generally people really loved the campaign. Here's one tweet that came out. Here's a Facebook post, as a couple of examples. When we gave this to the AI in early testing, it made up a fake one at the end. So it looked at real data, it had come to some conclusions, and it gave us a couple of completely fake posts. Wow. That looked very, very convincing. And those kinds of challenges are going to be really, really interesting in terms of the research side. But the same thing, I think, applies on, communicating with customers, because that's kind of a funny gimmick. And I don't know, maybe the CEO would never notice that it wasn't a real one when you produce the report and the example posts, right? But if you turn that around and you say we might be, the AI might be creating very convincing sounding but totally fake, I don't know, special offers or links to information on the website or things like that, you could suddenly encounter some really, really big problems there, because the consumer is suddenly very, very confused or even angry that you are sort of passing off the dialogue that you're having with them to an AI, which is making very, very glaring mistakes. So I'm really intrigued. I'd love to see the first brand. Maybe there is one already. I haven't seen one yet. That is branding itself as like we never make content with AI or something.
I'm sure that there is already out there somewhere where people have already said, okay, this was totally human made or something like that. Yeah, the human made, maybe the human made logo or something like that. Okay, Nick, it's been amazing. We could be here for some more hours talking about this. Let's keep it there. I will be more than happy because you were the first one. So if you want to come at any other moment to me, and I hope to keep this kind of going on. For the moment, we are launching a podcast in Spanish. It's a different thing, but this, I think, it really will add a lot of value for the readers of Rebel Intel. I'll keep these two final things, that it will be the need for authenticity, the need for trust, and how you build trust. This brand and reputation matters. It's always about trust and not just producing nice pictures or nice advertising campaigns, right? So thank you very much, Nick, for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. And then hope we have time to go for a pint in London, or if you come to Madrid, it will be a pleasure.
Thank you, Fernando. What a pleasure. Yeah.
Great, Nick.
Thanks for having me.